You know, some conflicts are so huge, so unbelievably brutal, they literally change the course of history. The Battle of Stalingrad was absolutely one of them. For more than 6 months, two of the most powerful armies on the planet just tore each other to shreds in a single city in what would become the bloodiest battle in all of human history.
But this was so much more than just a battle. It was the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany on the Eastern Front. So how did the fight for this one city on the Volga River completely seal the fate of the Third Reich? Well, that's exactly what we're going to break down right now.
All right, let's get into it. To really get why this one battle was so critical, we've got to rewind and look at the big picture of the war back in 1942. And believe me, the stakes could not have been higher.
By the summer of '42, the German war machine, the Wehrmacht, was pushing incredibly deep into Soviet territory. Their massive offensive, which they codenamed Case Blue, was all focused on conquering the South. So the big question is, why there?
This quote from Hitler himself really gets right to the heart of it. The German military was running on fumes, just desperately low on fuel. The #1 goal of Case Blue was to grab the huge oil fields of the Caucasus. Simple as that. Without that oil, their entire war effort was probably going to grind to a halt.
And this is where the city of Stalingrad enters the picture. Look, it was anything but a random target. It was a major industrial city and a vital transportation hub on the Volga River, which was essential for moving supplies. Taking it would protect the German army's flank as they made their big push south for the oil. But there was another, much more personal reason: its name. For Hitler, conquering Stalin's city was this massive symbolic prize. And for Stalin, defending it became a matter of personal and national honor. Okay, so the strategic stage was set. Now, let's zoom in from those big strategy maps to the absolutely terrifying reality for the soldiers and civilians on the ground. The German attack kicked off on August 23, 1942, with a just staggering aerial bombardment. The German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, unleashed one of the most intense bombing raids of the entire war, dropping over 1,000 tons of bombs and turning the city into an ocean of fire. The devastation was nearly total. Think about this. At least 90% of the city's housing was just gone, wiped off the map. But, in a huge twist of irony, by creating this wasteland, the Germans actually created the perfect defensive terrain for the Soviets. Yeah, instead of clearing the way, the bombing created a fortress of rubble. The battle just devolved into this new kind of hell: savage, close quarters, urban warfare. The Germans even had a name for it: Rattenkrieg, which means rat war. Every building, every single floor, every sewer tunnel became its own battlefield. This letter, which was found on a fallen German officer, it just captures the absolute desperation and frustration of it all. See, Germany's famous blitzkrieg tactics, totally useless here. The fight for a single factory sometimes lasted longer than their entire invasion of France. The city was just a meat grinder. And you can really see here how both sides were forced to adapt to this nightmare. You've got German soldiers who were masters of open field warfare, now having to clear out ruins room by room. And at the same time, Soviet defenders were turning that very same rubble into a fortress, a deadly maze of trenches, sniper nests, and fortified positions. So, as the German Sixth Army was being bled completely dry in the streets of Stalingrad, the Soviet High Command was quietly, brilliantly preparing a massive counterattack that was about to change everything. It was called Operation Uranus. And the Soviet plan wasn't to just fight the Germans head-on in the city. No, that was a trap. Instead, they spotted the real weak point: the German flanks, which were being held by less equipped Romanian and Italian troops. So on November 19th, they launched this enormous pincer movement, striking north and south of the city at the exact same time. Now check out this map, because you can see just how vulnerable the Germans had made themselves. By pushing so hard and so deep into the city, they basically created this long, narrow bulge in their lines, with these massively overstretched and weak flanks. It was a textbook strategic blunder, and the Soviets exploited it perfectly. And get this, in just 4 days, the two Soviet pincers met and snapped the trap shut. Just like that, the German Sixth Army, along with parts of the 4th Panzer Army, we're talking nearly 300,000 men, were now completely surrounded inside Stalingrad.
Now, the trapped German generals, they knew they were in deep trouble. They wanted to try and break out, but then a fatal order came directly from Hitler. There would be no retreat. The Sixth Army was ordered to dig in, form a fortress, and just wait for a relief force that was never gonna make it.
So now you've got an entire German army trapped. What happened next was one of the greatest military disasters in history. For the soldiers caught inside what they started calling the Kessel, which is German for cauldron. Conditions inside that Kessel were, well, they were apocalyptic. The brutal Russian winter set in, and temperatures just plummeted. The Luftwaffe's attempt to fly in supplies was a complete and catastrophic failure. Soldiers were dealing with starvation, rampant disease, and a constant lack of ammunition, all while fighting off nonstop Soviet attacks.
I mean, this contrast right here says it all. It shows you the shocking reversal of fortune. On the left, you see the confident German army on the attack, and on the right, the reality just a few months later, freezing, starving survivors marching into captivity. Of the nearly 300,000 men who were trapped, only about 91,000 were even left to surrender. And of those, fewer than 6,000 would ever see Germany again. On February 2nd, 1943, the last pockets of resistance finally gave up. This was so much more than just a military defeat. It was a profound humiliation. For the first time in history, a German field marshal had been taken prisoner and an entire field army had surrendered. The myth of German invincibility was completely shattered right there in the snow.
The annihilation of the Sixth Army. It wasn't just a single defeat on a map. It was the moment the entire war began to pivot. You really can't overstate the impact of this one Soviet victory.
First, let's just talk about the human cost, because it's almost impossible to comprehend. With nearly 2 million casualties combined, Stalingrad was, arguably, the single deadliest battle in the history of warfare. The sheer scale of that loss is just staggering. But strategically, the result was crystal clear. The destruction of the Sixth Army was a catastrophic blow from which the Wehrmacht never ever recovered. Germany's strategic initiative on the Eastern Front, it was gone, lost forever. From Stalingrad on, it was the Soviet Red Army that was on the attack, beginning that long, bloody road to Berlin. And all this brings us to a final, really provocative question. Stalingrad was an incredible victory of Soviet sacrifice and brilliant strategy, for sure. But it was also a disaster born from German arrogance and one single fatal decision from Hitler. It really makes you wonder, what might have changed, if anything at all, had that one order just been defied?